Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our topic today is paradigm of research, and the outline of the lecture is that we'll begin with the concept of truth or finding the truth or the search for truth. We'll discuss two concepts of social reality, how the social reality is constructed. We'll discuss positivism and the assumptions, nature, and tools of science or scientific method. We'll discuss some postulates of the scientific method. Then we'll move on to the criticisms of positivism and the scientific method as research paradigms. We'll discuss some other paradigms of research like naturalistic approaches to research, and discuss and compare normative and interpretive paradigms. Then we'll move on to discuss some methods like phenomenology, ethnomethodology, symbolic interactionism, and then the criticisms of naturalistic and interpretive approaches. After that, we'll move to discuss some mixed method research, and then some views about post-positivism, postmodernism, and post-structuralism, and end with some discussion on complexity theory. Well, as I mentioned, our topic today is the paradigms of research, or you can say, in other words, these are the research worlds. Paradigms are the world view of research. So let's begin with our first topic, that is about the paradigms of social research or research in social sciences. The first approach is named as positivist. Under the paradigm, we discuss the first approach as positivist approach. The second paradigm, or the word of research, is mixed methods. The third one is post-structuralist, and then it's a complexity theory, and then there is a post-modernist approach, and after that we'll discuss post-positivist approach, and then interpretive approach. Well, these are just a few names for the ideas or the philosophies we'll be discussing today, beginning with the positivistic approach and moving on to mixed methods, and then post-structuralist and the complexity theory, and the post-modernist and the post-positivist interpretative. When I use the term paradigm, I give you another word that is a word. The paradigm of social research, a word of social research. And beginning with the first approach, that is the positivist, in a macro level, or when we say it is a positivistic approach or it is a positivism, it is considered to be a macro level, at a higher level, means when it is generalized. Positivism developed with the ideas of Auguste Comte. His ideas developed to a systematic study of any natural phenomena, and that led to the development of positivistic approach. In short, we say it is a positivism. Positivism is the basis of all natural sciences, and the natural sciences remains the biological sciences or the physical sciences. We'll discuss some of the features of this approach or a research methodology. The first point about a positivism or the positivistic approach is the objectivity. It is understanding or researching, doing research on some objects from at a distance, not a personal involvement, not a personal passion, but to treat it dispassionately as a researcher. Researcher is an outsider and take things objectively. Second characteristic of such a research approach is that it is a kind of mnemothetic, and mnemothetic means to making laws, to generalize it, to make it a universal thing, and to reduce different things into one basic rule or a principle, or in other words, it is reductionist. So nomothetic, it is from naming. It means that to make rules and principles, look for the patterns, similarities, and on the basis of those similarities to predict and give it one principle, one paradigm, one law. That is why it is called nomothetic. It is making the laws, general rules for the interpretation of different behaviors. Other characteristic of this positivism is that it is controlled, and it is there is a controlled manipulation, that it is controlled by the researcher under certain conditions. It is not open-ended, it is closed, and it is its purpose is to generalize, to study a number of events, find some patterns in them, and then generalize it. So generalization is another key feature of positivism. After generalization, the next point or the feature of positivism is prediction. On the basis of the findings, certain predictions are made, and another feature of positivism is causality, that it is a determinism. Causality means everything which happens in this world has some kind of relationship, and that relationship is based in cause and effect. There can't be anything without a cause, there can't be any effect without a cause. Well, causality, if something happens, it has certain bases, and the basis of that are called the causes. So cause and effect relationship is the basic characteristic or feature of positivism. Then another feature of positivism is that you can quantify it, quantification. You can measure it and make different categories and those categories can also be placed or measured by using some unit. And its feature is that it is done at a large scale. It's not one issue, one problem, but a number of problems or issues. Or in other words, there would be a number of objects on which the research is carried out. To sum up, positivism developed from the ideas of Auguste Comte in the 19th century, and some of his postulates or principles were that anything, any research and evidence for a research can only be considered if it falls under the 5 senses. So authority would be under the positivistic approach would be that if something falls can be explained with reference to our observation or our 5 senses like hearing and tasting and other 5 like that, then it would be considered an evidence, and that would be the basis of research. And his ideas led to the development of a scientific approach or the basis of scientific method, and that was initially applied in the natural sciences. So what are the key features for that one? The positivism is normally used in the natural sciences. Its feature is that it is objective approach. Its purpose is to make laws, okay, by looking at a great or a large scale of data, and it is conducted in a controlled manner, and its variables are manipulated in a limited, in a controlled manner. Its purpose is to generalize, as it is about the laws which are applicable to a large number of instances, and its purpose is also it is predictive. On the basis of those findings, a prediction is made, and important feature is also that it considers that everything which happens has some relation of a cause and effect, so causality here. And then it is a kind of research which is measurable by using some unit, some kind of statistics, measure, a number is used in this type of research paradigm or research way, and it is based on a large number of respondents or large number of objects on which it is carried on. Look at these are some of the postulates, some of the principles of positivistic approach or positivism. Now look at the research design. If we use positivism as the basis of our research, what type of research design would develop? Well, in this case, research would normally begin with the identification of a topic. The first step in positivistic design of research is to identify a topic. Then you go on to see the review. You need to review previous literature. What other people have said or written on that particular topic, and that would be followed by making a hypothesis. By looking at what other people have done in that particular area or a field or on the topic. You generate a hypothesis, and that hypothesis would lead towards a research design of the research, and that is followed by collecting data for your research, for keeping in view your hypothesis, and that would be followed by analyzing data. So it starts with the identification of the topic, moves on to review of literature, and by review of literature I mean what other people have done in the topic, what research has already been conducted in that area, and from that reviewing you make or formulate hypothesis for your own research, and on keeping in view your hypothesis you design research, and then you collect data and you analyze data. Well, if it is you have done it up to here and you have done it properly and you are satisfied in testing your hypothesis, the final is, if everything is okay, it is yes, then you report your findings, and that is the design of your research based on positivism. Well, if you reach to the conclusion that all these don't help you in any way, then if you reach to the conclusion that no, it doesn't satisfy and it doesn't answer to the questions you have raised or the hypothesis you have made, then you look for alternative methods, look for alternative explanations, and you start the process again. And by that, starting the process again means you identify the topic, you review previous literature, and you formulate hypotheses, you design a research, you collect the data, and you analyze the data. If the answer to all these is yes, then you write a report. And if the answer is no, you look for alternative explanations, and you start the process again. And if you reach, you see the conclusion that everything is okay, and then you go and write the report. When we talk about positivism and paradigms, of course, positivism is one of the research paradigms. Sometimes you'll come across some terms which might be confusing for some of the people, or even for you, that is methodology and method. When we say methodology, it is a philosophical stand. It tells you about the approach, about the worldview, what you consider to be authentic, reliable for your research. When we talk about methods, they fall within the paradigm, within the methodology, and they are usually interchangeable for the tools for collecting data. So what are the tools or methods under positivistic paradigm or positivistic approach? We move on to that one by one. Okay, what are the positivist methods? What are the positivistic tools of collecting data? There are a number of ones, but I have picked a few here. First of all, in positivistic methods, you have the experimental method, and then you have surveys, and then you have tests. So in the positivist method, you have the experiments. What type of experiments? But by experiments in natural sciences, of course, the experiments are conducted in a controlled manner in labs. But if we relate with the social sciences, and especially if it is an educational research, experiments would be conducted on some of your students or teachers within the classroom. A few examples. One experiment could be testing the curriculum, testing the abilities of the students, or the way they develop their language skills. And surveys related with the questionnaires. One way of doing surveys is survey would be a large scale. That is another feature we have just discussed in positivistic approach. So in surveys you reach to a large number of people, and in educational research those could be your students, or those could be teachers, or those could be practitioners or organizers or administrators, and you take their opinion on a particular subject. Then there are certain tests. Especially in educational research, you will see that there are pre-tests and post-tests. If you want to see the effectiveness of a syllabus or any teaching technique, you can develop some of the tests. Well, you plan a pre-test where you determine the efficiency, language proficiency of the students, and then you teach them according to a particular technique you want to test, or you teach them a particular course, and you give that test again at the end of those instructions, and you compare. You see the first test, that was a pre-test before starting the course or using the technique, and then you give them the post-test and you compare the results. That falls under positivist method. By experiments, we say there could be two groups. Say you want to teach according to one particular method, say it is a direct method, or it is a audio lingual method, or it's a communicative approach. So you basically experiment on your students. One group of students within your class, you teach according to one method, and the other group according to a traditional method. So one would be a target group and the other would be a control group. So the target group would be the one you are basically experimenting, and the control group would be the one which would be taught according to the traditional method. Then you want to see what effect has taken place, whether by teaching communicative way or in a direct method, the experimental group shows the better results, or they are the same. So such types of experiments are used in positivist approach. This is just an example. It doesn't mean that there is only one way to do the experiments. Well, that is about some of the basic positivist methods. Now move on to the other approach. Other approach means that post-positivist approach are some approaches which have developed from they started with the positivist, but they move on to add something more, so that we say they are the post-positivist. So post-positivistic doesn't mean that it was something in contradiction or in opposition to positivism. It was just to add more that only positivistic approach is not enough, and there are certain areas where we need some other approaches to better understand the phenomena. One of those positivistic, post-positivistic approach, or post-positivism, is the interpretive paradigm, and that interpretive paradigm, we say that is a micro level. If you remember, I said in the beginning about the positivism that it is a macro level, and we say it is a macro level means it is conducted at a large scale. As compared to that, interpretative paradigm is a micro level. It is conducted at a local level on a small number of people or objects. So what are some of its paradigms, some of its features? Well, interpretative paradigm is basically a naturalistic approach to study basically the behavior of human beings in their natural settings, is one of the features of interpretative paradigm or a post-positivist approach. As we discussed, that positivism or the positivistic approach or paradigm was objective. As compared to that one, interpretative paradigm is subjective, and it is its feature is subjectivity, and it is intentionality. Then the third one is it is ideographic. That was nomothetic, to make laws based on a large number of data, and by looking at different patterns, reduce them to certain laws, one law. Whereas in ideographic, it is the opposite of nomothetic. That in this case, it is not to generalize or make laws, but it is in-depth study of one individual, one case study, and that is the feature of interpretive paradigm, and that concept is given a term in ideographic. Well, some of these terms, subjectivity and naturalistic and ideographic, they have been taken from social psychology or sociology. So these ideas have basically influenced most of the post-positivistic approaches in research. Another feature of interpretative paradigm is that it is context-bound. And the idea behind context-bound is that every individual or every situation is unique. It is conducted within a context, and by changing the context, by changing the time and space, the results won't be the same. So in interpretative paradigm, individual cases are discussed, and they are placed and considered as individual cases. So you can compare one individual case with another individual case, and this way you have many cases, but the purpose is not to generalize or make one law. The purpose is to understand it in its context, and where the two contexts are similar, there might be the similar results where you can compare them, but the approach itself doesn't say that its purpose is to find laws or to put them under certain principles, in one principle. Another feature of interpretative paradigm is that it is specific and it is non-generalizable. If you just recall, I mentioned in the beginning that one of the major features of positivism was that it is generalizable. The purpose is to generalize your results, means that they are applicable to a large community. Whereas in interpretative paradigm, it is non-generalizable. Its purpose is specific to one individual or one case. Its results may be similar to some other objects, but the purpose is not to make laws or to generalize it. The next important feature of interpretative paradigm is that its purpose is to understand and interpret. Understanding and interpretation is the basic purpose of this paradigm. In-depth understanding of objects. How do they behave? How do they operate? How do they make sense of it? The purpose is to understand in depth and then interpret it. The next feature of interpretative paradigm is interpretation. That you have understood the subject, and that is based on maybe a description, or it is also based on thick descriptions and collection of descriptions, one description, another description. So we use the term in social psychology, a term that is called a thick description. If you compare with the positivistic approach, the purpose was not the thick description. That was hard, rules are there. And the purpose was that there is a truth, and truth is out there. You go and find it. In interpretive paradigm, there isn't a hard truth. There's no one truth. There are many truths. And those truths can be combined to make some judgment, but the purpose is to understand each within its context and then give its interpretation by doing a thick description. In positivistic approach, we didn't discuss that there was any agent is important. Well, agent in the sense that the researcher is important, of course, but the individuals on which the experiment is conducted or research is conducted are not an agent. They are the passive ones. They don't have any active role. And the relation between the researcher and the objects on which the research is being conducted is a kind of the passive ones. There is no interaction. They are detached. So they are considered to be just like physical objects. And the purpose of positivism was basically to treat, you see, social sciences and human behavior as doing some research on physical objects. Another feature of interpretative paradigm is that it is fluid. It changes. It's not always the same. It varies from one context to another, from one individual to another, from one case to the other case. So fluidity or change is another feature of interpretative paradigm. Well, I have already referred to about the multiple truths. So that is another feature of interpretative paradigm, that it has multiple perspectives. And when you look at from those perspectives and try to understand within those perspectives that paradigm, that worldview would fall under interpretative paradigm. I'll name, you see, what I have discussed so far, that some of the features of interpretative paradigms are that it is the naturalistic, it is a subjective and intentional. You do that, you are going to work on it. It is idiographic, that its purpose is not to generalize, its purpose is not to make laws, but to understand or interpret a particular case in depth. It is context based, that from one context to another context, by changing its place or its time, the results would change. It's a specific and non-generalizable. Its purpose is not to generalize or work on all instances, but to focus on one aspect, one individual. And it is not generalized because it is one in-depth understanding and interpretation. It cannot be generalized for the whole population. Its purpose is understanding and interpretation, and it is based on except you see the agency who did it, and it is fluid and it changes with the time. It's not fixed, and it has multiple perspectives. That it has the perspective of the researcher as well as the perspective of the researchee on which the research is conducted. So these are two basic paradigms, positivism or post-positivism, which have been the basis of most of the researches. Two major paradigms, and others would be the offshoot of these these two paradigms. If you have an interpretative paradigm as your research paradigm, how will you develop a research design? Say it is interpretative design, research design or paradigm. And interpretative, we'll discuss some of the methods later on, but let's take ethnographic is one of them. Okay, as we discussed some of the methods in positivistic approach. For example, there were the experiments and surveys and tests. In the same way, in interpretative paradigm, there are certain methods. I'll come to them in a minute, but one of them is ethnographic. Ethnographic interpretative, if you have that is methodology, what would be the research design for that? So first of all, you have to identify a topic, as you did in positivistic paradigm as well. Then there would be a literature review, and that would be followed by the research design in the same way. And then there would be a data collection, and that would be followed by data analysis, and that would be elaboration of concepts and theories. So elaboration of concepts and theories, and the last one would be the report of findings. If you look at this research design, that is in the beginning, it seems to be similar to the positivistic approach, identifying the topic, doing the literature review, research design, data collection. The nature of data would be different in interpretative or ethnographic type of research, and then data analysis, and the last two are different from the positivistic approach, because here you have the elaboration of concepts and theories after data analysis based on the data, and then you have the report of your findings, just like in positivistic approach. So that would be the design or research design of ethnographic or interpretative method. Interpretative are used in a sense of post-positivistic paradigm, and within that there are a number of approaches within this. One of them is ethnographic. When I say interpretative, you may across some other terms. Sometimes they are interchangeable, like it is qualitative, and it is post-positivistic, and it is interpretative, or it is interactionist, yeah, or some other terms. We'll come across them and discuss later. Another, well, as I said, that interpretative are naturalistic. What are the interpretative or naturalistic methods? One method I have already mentioned, that was ethnographic. So what are the other methods in a qualitative or in a naturalistic approach or a paradigm? Well, before I move on to that one, let's look at some of their just a minute. Some of their features. If it is a naturalistic method, what do you do in a naturalistic method or interpretative method? Well, first of all, there is a thick description. I mentioned this phrase before. Thick description is a detailed description or analysis of a situation, analysis of any individual behavior. If you compare it with the positivistic method, there would be mostly discrete point. In a positivistic approach, I mentioned, say, it is a survey. And in a survey, you have a questionnaire. And you take the opinion of the people. In educational research, as I mentioned, you take the opinion of the students and the opinion of the teachers. What are those? The questionnaire would be in the form of some of the questions, and usually they are the closed questions in the form of some scales and the form of some maybe yes or no, or maybe making some list and they have to tick one of them. So that is very controlled and a kind of atomized, one item, another item, and then another item. We'll discuss this in detail when we'll discuss questionnaires and how to design good questionnaires and how to administer them. So as compared to a survey, that is the feature of a positivistic approach or a method within positivistic approach or paradigm. In naturalistic method or in a qualitative method or in a post-positivist method, you have a thick description. You have, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that it is ethnography. Ethnography is a kind of research where a researcher tries to understand by getting into the community he is doing some research. Well, I'll give you one example. As naturalistic approach, as it says a naturalistic method, it means it's just like nature, yeah, in a natural context, what the people are doing. So in a positivistic approach, you treat them, a researcher treats them as separate from himself or herself. They are out there, and he is maybe an observer, detached from them, not involved in their activities, in their affairs, in their issues. As compared to that one, in ethnography, researcher becomes a part of the community. He behaves as his researchers behave. He acts as they act. He eats what they eat and he wears what they wear. In a way, he becomes part of them. He becomes an insider, not an outsider, and then tries to make sense of how do they make sense of the world. I'll give you an example. Ethnographical type of research would be, say, if you are doing research on, say, the language of beggars or eunuchs. One way could be to observe them, give them a questionnaire and they fill in. So in this way you are not part of, you are a researcher at a privileged position or at a higher or a superior position, whereas they are detached over there and you are treating them just like any physical object. If you are doing an ethnographic approach, applying ethnographic approach, your attitude would be different. What will you do? You go and you live with them for a long time. You do what they do, and in a way they forget that you are a stranger or outsider. They treat them as member of their community. So you behave in a way they behave, and you live like them. So this way you have become actually part of their community, and by doing that you do your research and you try to understand how they interpret the world. In other words, how do they make sense of the world? How can we apply this to educational research, this ethnography? That is a kind of another term we use that is called participatory observation. Participatory means that you participate in with the people on whom you are doing some research. Example is, one way could be, that is a positivistic, that would be you observe a classroom, you go into a class, you sit there in a corner and you see what the people are doing and you are just noting down. If it is a research on the teacher or the teaching methodology, your role was as an outsider sitting in a corner observing and noting down. The other way would be that you attend the lecture, you do all the activities what other students are doing, and at the same time you are also making notes of what's happening and your comments about the methodology. This second type of approach is what ethnography is. That when you become the part of the people you are doing research on. Another method within naturalistic methods is narratives or the documents. Narratives and documents, interpretation of documents, what is already written in the form of reports, in the form of diaries, any written material. Narratives could be of two types. They could be in a written form or they could be in a spoken form. So you record what people say and then you analyze it, you interpret it, and that would be a narrative account. So the narrative account is a naturalistic method of getting the data. It falls under post-positivistic approach. Narratives are structured in a way, in a particular way. If it is a spoken form or oral narrative, you'll see that people don't just say what comes to their mind. In any narrative there would be certain features which would be common. If you ask people about what happened to them and what was their reaction on a particular occasion, they would give an account where you can see a clear pattern. They usually begin with telling a gist of it, something like, you know, it was interesting what happened to me. So that would be a kind of initiation, and then they would say that was the day and the time and the place. Yeah? You know, once it happens, once also tells about the time, or they would give specific details about the time and the place, and maybe about the characters. I was sitting with someone, and then this guy comes, and then there would be a story, what happened and what happened and what happened, and at the end they would say that that is what finally happened. And then there would be an evaluation, a kind of why it was important for me. I've been very brave, or I've been very depressed. Some evaluation of the events. Yeah. So the narrative account are also a part of naturalistic methods, and they are used, you see, in a number of fields now. Narratives as a research method in medicine, for example, doctor-patient interaction, or it could be about the history or the case history of the patients which doctors record, and they may try to make sense of what they say. And it could be in teachers' narratives, when the teachers tell their stories about their teaching methods, their achievements, their improvements. Or there could be student narratives, that would be how did they learn a particular skill or a particular language. So there are many fields in which narratives are used, and narratives is a kind of research which falls under naturalistic methods, or the qualitative method of research, or post-positivistic paradigm. We'll study these in detail. I think it's sufficient up to here about the narrative account. Okay, then you have the observation. A detailed observation of any phenomena also falls under naturalistic methods. And then you have interviews, and especially in interviews, we'll discuss the interviews and all these methods in detail, but interviews are usually two types. That is structured interviews, which are just like some questionnaires, and there are unstructured interviews which are open, and the researcher changes the questions and maybe the probing of it by asking further questions and taking the lead what the respondent has said. So in naturalistic methods we have what type of these methods are, like ethnography and thick description and interviews and the narratives and the interpretation of documents and the observations. Well, if we sum up what we have discussed so far, you can say that there are two paradigms or two major approaches. One is the positivist approach, or the positivist approaches, and other falls in naturalistic approaches. Don't be confused with the terminology. In different research books you may across some other terms about these, as I've already mentioned for naturalistic approach, that it is also called post-positivistic approach. Other terms people use, frequently use, and they are confusing ones. For the positivistic approaches, they are usually called quantitative approaches. That is a quantitative approach. And for the naturalistic, they use a qualitative approach. So make sure that you use these terms and you are familiar with them, and sometimes they are interchangeable. Not these two terms, I mean positivistic and quantitative are interchangeable, mean the same thing, and naturalistic and qualitative are almost the same. So when we say that a positivistic approach, let's sum it up. When we say positivistic approach, it means that something key figure in it would be that it would deal with numbers. There would be certain kind of measurement, and measurement means it would be related with a kind of statistics. And the other feature of the positivistic approaches is that usually they are a kind of a survey, or they are experimental in their approach. Well, survey and experiments we'll discuss in detail. In the same way we'll discuss, you see, what type of basic statistics is used, and as a researcher you must be familiar with. So if we take the pick that positivistic approaches deal with the numbers and measurement, and they are kind of surveys and experimental in nature. Whereas naturalistic approaches, they are ethnographic, they are interviews, they are observations, they are case studies, and they are action research. Well, you'll see that there are certain ethnography, interview, and observation. They are just sometimes we use the same in positivistic approaches as well. Why we do? It depends, you see, what type of interview you are taking. If your interview is structured and you have a kind of closed type of questions, yes, no, a limited answer, it's just like it's just like a kind of a questionnaire. It's a better form. Purpose is to get as many people as you can. So if you are using in this way interview, that would be positivistic because it deals with the numbers, with a large scale. But the same method interview could be used as a naturalistic one or interpretative one if it is an unstructured interview, and you give the respondents, a few respondents, a time to explain the phenomena in depth by probing them, picking the points from their conversation and using them as a stimulus. So the in-depth interviews and mostly open-ended questions make it a kind of naturalistic approach. But two of them which I have mentioned in this diagram here are the case studies and action research. But the case study is usually a case study of an organization. It could be a case study of one person, one student in your class, or one phenomena, and that is a detailed or in-depth analysis of that one case or one phenomena. In the same way, action research, and in educational research, action research would be research during your teaching. One example could be that example of action research would be that as a teacher you find something while you are teaching. One example could be you find a behavior of a particular student different from others. So you notice while you were teaching that one student in your class have a different behavior. So you come across this topic while you were doing something else. You were in action. That is, in this case, you were teaching, a practical teaching. You make a hypothesis. What could be the reason for that different behavior? And you develop some hypothesis. It may be a discipline problem. The hypothesis could be that this student might have some worry at home. There is something in his mind which makes it behave like that. So you make a plan and you discuss with other teachers. You may read some books on the behavior of students, and from there you develop a more refined hypothesis and you test it. That you apply some techniques on that student and you see that there is any improvement in behavior or not. And sometimes the behavior improves in one area, but something else happens. So in this way, you make another hypothesis and the process continues. So that is just one example of action research, which we'll be doing in detail in the coming sessions. Well, two basic or two paradigms about the research are positivistic approach, and the other is post-positivistic or naturalistic approach. Some of the key points of these two approaches, the positivistic usually takes into account numbers and a kind of measurement, and it is related with a large scale, and surveys and experiments are used in positivistic approach. In naturalistic or post-positivistic approach, the methods are ethnography, the mode of getting data, unstructured interviews, observations, detailed observations, and then there are the case studies and action research. Well, these are not the only two paradigms, though they are the basis of all offshoots of paradigms, because they have evolved out of it. So one possible approach you can guess would be a mixed method approach, where you mixed the methods of positivistic and post-positivistic, and that is called a mixed methods approach. And what are the features of mixed methods approach? Well, they are the surveys, they also include interviews, the ethnography, and observation, and experiment, action research. All these are the mix. You see, the survey, interview could be either in positivistic, post-positivistic. Ethnography was qualitative or post-positivistic. Action research was post-positivistic. Yeah? And you have virtual worlds, you have historical and documentary, and meta-analysis, and case study, and numbers and measurement. So mixed methods, we have mixed them. One meaning of mixed methods is that you combine the features of one approach, that is a positivistic, and you also use some features of post-positivistic approach, and that is a mixed method. I'll give you just one example. We'll study these in detail in the coming sessions. Well, there can't be any research that is just based on numbers and measurement. Numbers and measurement refers to positivistic or positivism. But if you just present, you see, in the form of numbers, in the form of charts and diagrams, there won't be any research. You have to explain, describe, interpret those numbers, and that falls under naturalistic, or what we said, post-positivistic or qualitative kind of research. So mostly research theses are based on both numbers and words, and if they are the numbers and words together, they are mixed. So numbers predominantly feature of positivistic approach, and words predominantly it is the feature of qualitative or post-positivistic approach, words. Well, to sum up, post-positivism, post-structuralism and post-modernism, those are the approaches which have developed in reaction, or because the positivism couldn't answer certain questions. Well, positivism, what are those questions which positivism couldn't answer, and that led to the development of post-positivism, post-structuralism and post-modernism kinds of research? One was that positivism was good as a scientific method, doing experiments in laboratories where the results were consistent and they were controlled. But it failed about the human behavior, because human beings are complex, and same methods cannot be applied to their behavior. Their behavior changes with the context. So what developed, other approaches as a research to find the truth, they are post-positivism, post-positivism, post-structuralism and post-modernism. And some of the characteristics of these post-theories are they don't believe, or they don't treat only one reality or one truth. Rather they treat, you see, multiple realities or multiple truths. They are interpretative. They are phenomenology. Every phenomena is unique. They are they consider no grain narratives. There are small narratives, as there are multiple realities or truths. There are multiple meanings, not one definite fixed meaning. There are differences and diversity among the behavior of the people, and there are contradictory discourses, and there are context and temporality, as I discussed before. The context, the place would change it, and the time, temporality, would have an effect on the behavior of the people. And there is an agency and individualism. So all those things we discussed under post-positivism, that also applies to other approaches which have developed, like post-structuralism and post-modernism. So they share post-positivism, post-structuralism and post-modernism, the areas I have just mentioned. Add a few more, that they are the discourses and relativists. So at the end, I will say another approach. We started with the paradigms. The paradigms was about the positivistic paradigm and post-positivist paradigm and mixed method paradigm, and the last I'll discuss that the complexity theory. The complexity theory takes into account that all systems are open systems, and it takes, you see, holism, not atomism, or not discrete points, but something as a whole, its features are. And it is emergence, that you don't have any question or hypothesis in the beginning. By looking at the data or studying it, the hypothesis or the question arises. It has non-linear systems. We have very linear system in positivistic approach, positivism, and there are connectedness, that one phenomena, one thing is connected with another thing. There are many stakeholders. If you take in educational background, and in education, if you take and a school, so who are the stakeholders? And they are connected. They are the parents, they are the children, they are the teachers, they are the government, they are the administrators. So if you have to study in detail a phenomena, the opinion of one section won't be sufficient. That was the characteristic of positivism. So complexity brings that every phenomena is complex, and it is interconnected or interrelated. So study the phenomena in the whole, in holism. Okay, there is a distributed control. Every stakeholder has some part, and it is based on feedback and communication. The behavior changes with positive feedback and working on it. And it's another characteristic. There is a self-organization which plays an important role in complexity theory, and there is a complex adaptive systems, and finally there are the relationships between different aspects of a phenomena. Well, that was our topic, our session today, about different paradigms of research, or different words of research, and within them we discussed 4. That was, we started with the positivistic or the positivism, then we moved on to naturalistic or post-positivism, and then we discussed mixed methods where you combine both the features of both positivism and post-positivism, and the last we discussed that it is a complexity theory. It is a kind of emerging one. It is not very old. It is still in infancy and developing, and some of its key features are here, that it takes the things as a holistic. It has a holistic approach. Take one aspect and study it in detail, but also look what are the other stakeholders with this one, and what is their share, and how they are interconnected, and they make the sense of the world. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening.